Hello, I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and this is a review of Episode 7 of the Fallout TV show. As with the first 6 videos in this series, I intend to cover each of the sections of the episode in turn, giving a broad strokes plot summary, a listing of the good, the confusing, and the bad aspects of each section. I'll also detail anything I think is lore-breaking and anything that has been added to the lore of the universe. Lastly, I'll list the character details given in each section for each character. That being said, let's get started. A lead-farming father and son come home to find the ghoul sitting at their kitchen table. The ghoul reveals that he came tracking a lead on the location of Moldaver, a lead that he got by killing the family's eldest son. He interrogates the younger son for Moldaver's location and receives it. Before he leaves, he asks the younger son if he's going to draw on him, and when he does, the ghoul kills the boy and leaves. On to the good aspects. The setting of these scenes was great. From the sandy wasteland where they scavenged lead to the more verdant land where their homestead was. Along with this, I think the showrunners nailed the atmosphere for the scene, where the ghoul's presence was an unwelcome surprise for the lead farmers coming home, and how he maintained the intense feeling of unease right up until he left the place. On to the confusing. The whole situation surrounding the letter is confusing. Let's start with something I would like more information on before moving on to the properly confusing. First off, how does the mail system in the area work? We have a little bit of experience with this from the work of the courier in Fallout New Vegas, but that was easily a more stable territory. Do they just tell a courier, go, find this guy, give him this letter, he lives in a shack in this area? Who pays? The sender or the receiver? How does one get in contact with a courier? In Fallout New Vegas, there were Mojave Express boxes and an office. Is it the same sort of thing here? With that said, here's the really confusing stuff. In fact, let's just go ahead and call this the bad elements of the scene. Let's start with the physical nature of the letter itself. The envelope is clean and says Rufus on the front. Within is a blood-stained letter with a bullet hole in it. How did the letter get a bloody bullet hole, but the envelope didn't? Now let's talk about the contents of the letter. According to the ghoul, the letter says that Rufus sent Tommy a stash of caps to pay a courier for the safe transport of an Enclave defector to Moldaver. Given that Rufus was with Moldaver's people, he sent Tommy the original plan to convey Dr. Wilzig to Moldaver and the stash of caps to make it possible. Why did he do this instead of simply sending this on to Ma June? As the envelope is addressed to Rufus, I think we have to assume that Tommy sent this letter. Did Tommy really recap the entire plan to Rufus in his return letter? If not, how would the ghoul be able to get that information from the letter? Next, how did Tommy mail Rufus this letter? How did he do so without his father knowing? Lastly, we have to consider the means by which the ghoul got his hands on the letter. It's clearly implied that he killed Rufus for it, but how did the ghoul know Rufus was working for Moldaver? How did the ghoul find Rufus? Where did the ghoul find Rufus? The blood on the letter is bright red, which implies that it was recently added to the paper. Was Rufus already close to home? If so, why? This scene hinges on this letter leading the ghoul back to the lead farmers, but everything about the letter is confusing. I didn't see anything lore-breaking, so let's move on to new lore elements. There are lead farmers in the wasteland. What I believe we're seeing here is part of the artisanal economy of the wasteland, where people collect old slugs from battle sites, melt them down, and recast them for ammo manufacturing. Whether the lead farmers we see process the lead into new bullets or just collect it and refine it, I'm not sure, but from the equipment we saw, I'm leaning towards the latter. With that said, on to character traits. From the conversation between the ghoul and the father, two things were clear to me. They knew each other, and they had fought each other. As the father and son were using NCR Ranger armor as they worked, I believe that the father is a former NCR Ranger. And if that's so, and the ghoul and this man have a contentious past, I think it's safe to say that the ghoul had run-ins with NCR Rangers before the fall of Shady Sands. Other than that, this scene told us that Moldaver operates out of a site known as the Observatory, and has been in a leadership position for at least the past 2 years. On to Section 2. Cooper Howard attends a communist meeting headed by Miss Williams. After he gets up to leave in disgust, the two of them discuss Miss Williams' invention, and Barb Howard's acquisition of said invention. Before they part ways, Miss Williams provides Cooper with a listening device to spy on his wife. On to the good aspects. I liked seeing Cooper Howard's reaction to Miss Williams' speech, from his quiet annoyance to open disgust, and his measured responses to her direct statements against him. On to the confusing. Miss Williams doesn't go back to the meeting after she finishes talking to Cooper Howard, or if she does, she takes a different route. For clarity, upon leaving the meeting to speak privately, she and Cooper Howard walk along a hallway. They stop to speak, and she leaves, continuing in the same direction. Are we to assume that the meeting was over, or what? This isn't a big issue, I'm simply curious. I didn't see anything here that I didn't like, nor anything lore-breaking, so let's move on to new lore elements. In the last episode, we heard from Charlie Whiteknife that Vault-Tec is a $1 trillion company. Here, Miss Williams said that it's the largest company in America. Like I said last time, it seems to me that the show has grown the scope of Vault-Tec. Along with this, Miss Williams claims to have developed cold fusion, a technology that she says Vault-Tec purchased and shelved. In the next episode, we get evidence that she did indeed develop it, and that Vault-Tec did have control of the technology, but her claim that they shelved the technology is only partly true. I don't think she's lying, I think she just didn't know that Vault-Tec would go on to use her technology in the Garden of Eden creation kit. According to Miss Williams, her cold fusion technology would have provided infinite energy, ending the need for a resource war. With that said, on to character traits. It seems that before the war, Moldaver went by the name Miss Williams. Beyond this, we learn that she's a scientist responsible for inventing cold fusion. Her company was acquired by Vault-Tec, and the use of her invention was kept in-house. She claims not to be a communist, and I believe her. The US government of the Fallout universe used the population's innate hatred of communism as a way to ostracize its enemies in other areas, such as the members of the Free States movement in Appalachia. They were anti-government survivalists, but the government called them communists to turn their neighbors against them and inoculate the local population against recruitment. Though he appeared in this scene, there wasn't much added to the character of Charlie Whiteknife here, aside from his disappointment that Cooper wasn't willing to stay for the full meeting. Cooper Howard, while growing anti-Vault-Tec, is still a patriotic American and ardent capitalist. He doesn't realize that his values have been co-opted by the fascistic American government of the Fallout universe, which has unified the powers of corporate and state into a single totalitarian entity. His last stumbling block seems to be that he loves and trusts his wife, and she's a part of that entity. It's when Miss Williams attempts to get him to spy on Barb that he finally dismisses her. Barb Howard is the head of the Vault-Tec division that purchased Miss Williams' company to keep the cold fusion technology in-house. We'll see Vault-Tec's reason for limiting the spread of this tech in the next episode. On to Section 3. After her capture in Vault 4's Forbidden Level 12, Lucy McLean learns about the Vault's origins. Because she injured members of the staff, it's declared that she'll have to pay for her crimes and is dragged away. When Maximus sees her getting dragged past his room, he decides to help her. On to the good aspects. Overall, I really enjoyed the reveal that the mutant Vault Dwellers who preceded the new arrivals from Shady Sands were in fact descendants from the Vault's test subjects, not the original 80 scientists and their families. It's something that we haven't seen before in the Fallout universe. Along with this, I loved that the purpose of Lloyd Hawthorne's last words before he was consumed by his failures was to claim that the failure of Vault 4's experiment should not be taken as a case study for what happens when scientists are given unregulated control. I also enjoyed that Overseer Benjamin claimed the Gulper that killed Cassandra and Lloyd Hawthorne was his great-uncle Peter. It's definitely BS, but I took it as a wacky wasteland sort of thing that I think it was intended as. First off, Overseer Benjamin claims to be 5th generation. His great-uncle would have been 3rd generation. Given the appearance of Lloyd Hawthorne, it's clear that the Vault failed in the first few years to first decade post-war. There's practically no way Overseer Benjamin's great-uncle would have been born at the time, approximately 210 to 219 years prior. Beyond this, we saw Gulpers being born in the previous episode. They came out of their human mother as Gulpers about a dozen at a time. The idea that these dozen creatures that ate their mother would both be considered a relation and worthy of naming is clearly ridiculous. Again, I look at this as a wacky wasteland sort of thing and enjoyed it as such. I thought it was interesting that Birdie grouped Lucy in with the original occupants of Vault 4. I really enjoyed Lucy's reaction to the question about what the experiment in Vault 33 is, and Maximus looking sadly down at his popcorn before he got up to help Lucy. On to the confusing. I'd like to know how the more human mutants took control of the Vault after the fall of the original Dwellers. I could be wrong, but I would assume that the Gulpers and other horrors that were created by the scientists would also be hostile towards the more human test subjects. I didn't see anything here that I didn't like, nor anything lore-breaking, so let's move on to new lore elements. We now know that the experiment of Vault 4 was hybridizing humans with radioactive resistant species. The Vault staff used the lure of medical supplies at Hawthorne Medical Research Laboratory to draw in survivors of the Great War. They would then imprison the survivors as test subjects and use them to create hybridized creatures. At the very least, we know that Vault 4 is responsible for the existence of the LA variant of the Gulper. I suppose that this tells us that whatever salamander they hybridized humans with is radiation resistant. Unless the Gulper killed by Maximus at the river was a former denizen of Vault 4, the science team managed to hybridize mammals and amphibians and create a viable species capable of reproduction. As much as I don't want to think about this part, it's likely that the Vault staff killed any man that dropped into the Vault and kept women as test subjects, given their need for wombs from which to produce mutant offspring. On to less terrible things, we now know of a partner product to the Radiation King television. the Radiation Queen videotape player. As far as I know, this is the first Radiation Queen we've ever seen. With that said, on to character traits. Lucy McLean is learning about vault experiments for the first time. That being said, she's still unaware of the nature of her home vault and its relationship with Vault 31. Her life story has been focused on a strong family life and a belief in the mission of the vaults. One has to wonder how losing these foundational aspects of her character might affect her. Maximus here balances a life of comfort and his feelings for Lucy, and Lucy wins out. We'll see just how far he's willing to go down this path soon enough. On to Section 4. Thaddeus arrives at a Red Rocket station where he stashes most of his gear and CX-404 before limping off in search of a radio station from which he can call for a pickup. On to the good aspects. I thought that the setting was well done. I know from pre-release content that they dressed up a real site for this shot and it paid off. I liked that this section started out with Thaddeus trudging along, toting a heavy sack of supplies to the tune of 16 tons. Not only does the song feel right for the scene, but it's also a part of the Fallout 76 licensed music. I liked watching CX-404 try to take her dad's head back from Thaddeus. The way she grabbed at the strap of the bag and tried to pull it, and Thaddeus telling her off for her bad behavior felt very real. Though the effects on Thaddeus's broken foot weren't the best, I did appreciate how disgusting it looked. Lastly, I liked Thaddeus following the radio signal to find the radio station. In reality, he'd be quite lucky to follow the signal straight to the station. He would either need more precise measurement of signal strength and to use triangulation, or he'd end up doing a lot of wandering around, listening intently for minor increases and reductions in sound quality. That being said, it is the method by which we sometimes have to search for broadcasts in the Wasteland in-game. That pretty much covers my thought on these scenes aside from character traits. Thaddeus shows himself to care about CX-404 here. He needs to go on without her, because her constant goal is the control of Wilczek's head, and it's hindering his movement. He doesn't kill her, he doesn't harm her, he leaves her in a spot where she can't follow him. And he makes sure that she's not going to be harmed in the process. I believe that his goal was this: get to the radio station, call for a pickup, lead the vertebrate back to the Red Rocket station, pick up his gear and the dog, as she was one of the two wanted individuals. He was going to go back for her. There's not much to say here about CX-404 aside from the fact that she'll follow Wilczek's head wherever it goes. On to Section 5. In Vault 4, Lucy is sentenced to exile for her crimes. Maximus, unaware of these developments, enters the atrium in his power armor powered by the Vault's fusion core to free Lucy. Once Lucy has made him aware of his mistakes, they leave the Vault. On to the good aspects. I enjoyed how Only You, as performed by the Platters, played when Maximus entered the atrium. I first heard the song when playing Far Cry 5, when the song is used as a trigger for psychological conditioning performed by the members of the Project at Eden's Gate cult, or Peggies as they're known to the unaffiliated. I haven't heard the Platters music in Fallout games, but it would be a good fit. I purchased a great hits album of theirs, and it included Twilight Time, which I first heard in X-Files Season 5, Episode 11, Kill Switch. Anyway, back to what I liked about the episode. I enjoyed Overseer Benjamin's reaction to Lucy's realization that she was being freed, and that he both assumed she wanted help getting the supplies to the surface, and that he was willing to provide it. I liked both Maximus's reaction to his mistake, and the awkward elevator ride to the surface. Maximus in power armor, the look on Lucy's face, the music playing, were all great. On to the confusing. Just one thing here really, where did they get the sword that they used for the fake-out execution? I'm not saying it's impossible that they would have it, it's possible that it was an old movie prop or something from a martial arts store that was scavenged, it's just odd, and doesn't look like something native to the Vault. I'd like to know where it came from. On to the bad parts. First, Birdie tells the assembled crowd, "You deserve safety." I believe that's true, but if Birdie believes that, why does the staff let anyone into the vault and then let them roam freely throughout? Why not secure sensitive areas of the vault like level 12 and the power plant? Next, the death by banishment to the surface was just over the border of too silly for me. I fully appreciate that the dwellers of Vault 4 would consider it to be a profoundly serious punishment. They live in paradise relative to most of the wasteland. I don't have a problem with their choice of punishment, but carrying the sword over and using it to slowly saw through the binding was a bit too silly for me. Lastly, I didn't like that the vault was powered off a fusion core. In the games, we've seen that vaults are generally issued two sources of power, primary and secondary. The primary power source is something like Vault 76's Light Life Geothermal, or Vault 87's General Atomics Nuclear Power, or Vault 112's Sure Power Geothermal. Secondary power sources were also generally robust, either incorporating nuclear power or even more robust geothermal in the case of Vault 112. Unless the Vault experiment was based on a power system failure as we found in Vault 108, the sources were meant to last quite some time. In the past, we've found these miniaturized fusion cores powering individual buildings like the Museum of Freedom in Concord. Nothing as big and draining as Vault 4. Let's assume that after 219 years the primary power had failed, and the Vault Dwellers managed to rework the power to come off a miniaturized fusion core. How do they only have one core on hand? I know that they're rare by this time, but given that they have scavenging teams canvassing the area, how can they be short of cores? Given that they have only one core, why on earth would they leave it unguarded? Lastly on this point, how was Maximus able to extract the core so easily this time when last time he was in the power plant, he missed pressing the big eject button at the top? Anyway, I think that's enough on that topic. As I didn't see anything necessarily lore breaking, let's move on to new lore. As mentioned previously, Vault 4 is run off a miniaturized fusion core, and it appears that their most severe punishment is death by exile. With that said, onto character traits. Lucy was willing to give up Maximus's assistance in her hunt for her father so as to give him a better life. Similarly, Maximus was willing to give up that better life in order to help her. He also may have killed one of the Vault security guards. It was played off as a joke, but the gut punch that sent that guard flying was probably enough force to destroy some organs. On to section 6. Lucy and Maximus, once again on the surface, agree to return Vault 4's fusion core, forcing Maximus to abandon his armor again. With the core returned, Lucy asks Maximus if he wants to come live with her after they rescue her father. Maximus tells Lucy his real name, and she accepts him for who he is. On to the good aspects. I enjoyed watching Maximus struggle with the desire to keep the fusion core. It's clear that being a power armor clad knight has been his greatest wish since he was a child. He finally had that opportunity for a couple of days before it was taken from him. Now he has a choice in the matter, and he makes the right one. Not only is this the right move with regards to not destroying Vault 4, but it also shows that his growing friendship and romance with Lucy have become more important to him than his childhood dream. Lastly, he finally has someone he can be truly close with. Along with this, having finished the show, Lucy's line, "If my dad found out that I destroyed an entire community to save him, that'd break his heart," is one of my favorites, especially given the population makeup of Vault 4. On to the confusing. The way that the trapdoor to the Hawthorne Medical Laboratory works is odd. We see a Vault Dweller janitor cleaning the floor of the chamber when the fusion core comes falling down. Is there no alarm for that chamber? What if it hadn't been Maximus and Lucy returning the fusion core, but a group of raiders that triggered it? What if it had been a live grenade instead of a fusion core? There wasn't anything here that I didn't like, nor anything lore breaking, so let's move on to new lore elements. First of all, it appears that unlike Maximus's original fusion core, not all fusion cores are in fact keyed. This one took nothing more than a slight twist to pop out. This tells me that the first core on the power armor was keyed by the Brotherhood. As for the Hawthorne Medical Laboratory, it was only upon watching this scene for the second time that I realized the connection between Hawthorne Medical Laboratory and Lloyd and Cassandra Hawthorne, the first leaders of Vault 4. Lastly, we learn that Vault 33 likely has aquacultured tuna. Lucy says that her vault doesn't have oysters like Vault 4, but it does have tuna. As the Amazon Extras tell us that the vault used oysters as a food source and waste processing system, this is probably true of tuna as well. I looked it up, and tuna aquaculture is a thing and seems to be a growing industry as well. With that said, on to character traits. Lucy has found in Maximus someone that she can trust, and she hopes someone with whom she can spend her life after she brings her father home. Maximus has abandoned his alias with Lucy and laid himself bare. I have to believe that her acceptance of him after shedding the Knight Titus persona was hugely important. He's also showing that he's willing to abandon his long-held dream of knighthood to live a life of peace with a good woman. On to section 7. Thaddeus continues his trek across the wasteland until he meets the snake oil salesman. In exchange for the fusion core he carries, the snake oil salesman provides him with a tincture that heals his foot. With his foot restored, Thaddeus returns to his trek across the wastes towards the radio station. On to the good aspects. I liked the fiddle music only radio station as it feels very reminiscent of in-game stations, especially Agatha's station in Fallout 3. I loved seeing the snake oil salesman again. He's one of my favorite side characters, probably my favorite side character if we take away the characters to whom I'm more receptive because I'm familiar with their actors and like seeing them in the Fallout universe. Along with this, we see here that the snake oil salesman may actually have been able to heal Dr. Wilzig's missing foot in episode 2. I liked the setting of the snake oil salesman's office. To be clear, this is the exact same filming location as the Westside Clinic where the ghoul and Lucy found Roger back in episode 4. I'm not sure they intended this to be the same location, but regardless, I liked the set. I also enjoyed seeing the contents of the snake oil salesman's case, which included old school remedies like turpentine and quassia, and even a vial labeled placebo. Lastly on this point, I really enjoyed seeing the strange chemical that Thaddeus took, that, for the moment, we're left to speculate on. I've seen some speculate that it's whatever drug turned Hancock into a ghoul in Fallout 4, but personally, I favor it being FEV. FEV, or the Forced Evolutionary Virus, is a product of the WestTech Corporation. As I mentioned previously, it was originally the PvP, the Pan Immunity Variant Project, before its potential to create super soldiers was discovered. I believe that Thaddeus is in the early stages of becoming a super mutant. We've seen several different methods of applying FEV to a test subject. At times, people have been dunked into tanks of the virus, it was added to the water supply of Huntersville, West Virginia, and was turned into an inhalant by Dr. Blackburn. One of the properties that made FEV so promising was the healing ability it unleashed on those affected, and the repair to his foot would be a marker of that. While it confers effective immortality, those familiar with super mutants know that it's not a perfect product, hence the constant growth in those afflicted with the virus over time. Along with this, my understanding is that the virus views haploid cells, sperm and eggs, as flawed cells and destroys them, rendering those infected infertile. There wasn't anything here that confused me, that I didn't like, nor anything lore related, so let's get to the character traits. It appears that Thaddeus has become something other than human. Whether super mutant or ghoul remains to be seen, but whatever he is, the snake oil salesman implies that he's immune to radiation. On to Section 8. The Raiders imprisoned in Vault 33 since the Triennial Trade are poisoned. In the aftermath of this, Overseer Betty Pearson releases the new Vault assignments involved in moving half of 33's population into 32. Norm visits Chet one last time. On to the good aspects. I enjoyed that as he drops his role in Chet and Norm Adventure Bro Squad, Chet makes it clear that he knows something is up, but he's making a choice to ignore it. When Norm asks Chet if he thinks it's time for a fresh start, he indicates that he thinks that one of Betty's goals here was to separate the two of them. I thought it was interesting to see the different reactions to the moving notifications. Woody was clearly devastated about having to move, while Davey and Stephanie were thrilled. I also like the mystery we're left with as to who killed the Raiders. Currently we have 3 obvious suspects: Norm, Stephanie, and Betty. Norm and Stephanie have wanted revenge since the raid. As for Betty, getting rid of the Raiders right before the Vault population halves would be a safer path. Along with this, the song What a Difference a Day Made plays just preceding the revelation of their deaths. This was the song that played when Betty revealed the mysteriously remade Vault 32, and could be a theme song of sorts for when Betty is up to something. On to the confusing. There's a shot of Norm wheeling in Jello cake that is obviously reused from episode 4. Was this intended to be a new Jello cake rolling in, potentially from Betty's ascension to Overseer, or did they just run out of B-roll? There were also shots of the Raiders eating that made an appearance before the meeting to determine their fate in episode 3. On to the bad parts. The depiction of death by rat poisoning was half-baked. Rat poison is typically based on the blood thinner Coumadin. While the corpses looked pale, one of the symptoms of a Coumadin overdose, none of the other telltale symptoms were present. Some symptoms require the afflicted to be alive to notice, such as fatigue and dizziness. That being said, the bodies should have shown signs of bruising and bleeding, such as nosebleeds and bleeding gums, and the vomit should have been dark instead of white. While most shows would shy away from such things, the rest of the show is quite graphic at times, so this feels like a miss. I didn't see anything here lore related, so let's move on to character building. Norm is either good at hiding his true feelings about the Raiders or was surprised by their deaths. Along with this, while Norm was surely annoyed to lose his companion and rooting out the truth about the Vault, he was sad to see Chet go, and he was lashing out as a result. While Chet is attracted to Stephanie, I don't think he actually likes living with her. The way he moves when she's around implies a certain level of annoyance. I imagine that he questions how it is that he made out with her once and is now saddled with another man's baby, and a woman who both controls his life and, at least for the moment, is making him do everything for the 3 of them. Stephanie shows herself to be quite excited about the move, and we'll see exactly why soon enough. Woody and Reg, longtime friends from the Vault Council, are being broken apart by the move. As I've stated previously, I think that in the Overseer election that while Reg voted for Betty, I believe Woody voted for himself. As I've also stated previously, I think it's quite possible that the voting was not as private as the voters believed. If Woody did vote for himself, and Betty knew that, it would make sense as to why he would be the one chosen to leave as Betty consolidates power within the newly reduced Vault 33. Lastly, Betty is quick to blame Norm's statements against the Raiders for these deaths. On to Section 9. While en route to Moldaver, the ghoul finds CX-404 stashed in the Nuka-Cola fridge of the Red Rocket station. Upon setting her free, the two of them follow Thaddeus' trail. I only have two thoughts on this scene. First, I like seeing the ghoul and CX-404 together, they feel like a natural partnership. Second, this scene is kinda crazy, as it throws the ghoul right back into the hunt for Wilzig's head after a 3-episode break. He left CX-404 by the river in episode 3. As far as he knew, Dr. Wilzig's head was still in the Gulper. He doesn't know that Maximus and Thaddeus killed the beast and that it expelled the head. He doesn't know that Thaddeus limped all his way here with the head. The ghoul simply knew that CX-404 wouldn't leave the river unless she was following Wilzig's head. We've talked in the past about the special stats of characters, and this encounter tells us that the ghoul's luck would be close to 10. On to Section 10. Cooper Howard connects the listening device provided by Miss Williams to his wife's Pip-Boy. After initial misgivings make him throw the device out, he fishes it out of the trash can later that night. On to the good aspects. This is a pivotal scene in the life of Cooper Howard and in his relation to Barb. After all that he learned and experienced in the time since he became Vault-Tec's spokesman, he had developed a dislike for the company, but until this point he had trusted his wife. Just as it was the no dogs in the vault policy that eventually pushed him to attend the communist meeting, his love for his dog once again pushed him over the edge. As we'll see in the next episode, the things that Cooper Howard hears with this listening device will shake him to his foundations. There wasn't anything here that confused me, that I didn't like, nor anything lore-breaking, so let's talk about the new lore element. It seems that there were earpieces that natively paired with Pip-Boys. I would guess that this was a standard product produced by Robco for the consumer market. That being said, I don't know exactly what the purpose of the earpiece would be. I guess one could use their Pip-Boy as a baby monitor and go into the other room with the earpiece, but using a Pip-Boy like that feels like overkill. I have to assume that the earpieces were capable of working as earbuds and one could listen to the Pip-Boy's radio, but otherwise it feels like a product that was almost meant to be used to bug someone. Again, I'm assuming that it was a normal consumer product because the Pip-Boy automatically paired with it. With that said, on to character traits. Cooper Howard is really the only character in this scene that sees development, and we see him finally flip to distrusting his wife. Though he initially regrets this and reprimands himself, he fishes the listening device out of the trash and goes on to make use of it. On to Section 11. The ghoul and CX-404 rest for the night as the ghoul reflects on his long-lost dog. This was a fairly short scene, but I do have 3 things to note. First, the sign in the background indicates that Cooper is once again near the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, so he's getting fairly close to the observatory. Second, we see that for something like 220 years, Cooper Howard has been missing Roosevelt. That must have been one hell of a dog. Lastly, he refers to CX-404 as Dogmeat. This is the name of the dog companion we get in Fallout games. I saw a fun Fallout conspiracy theory a while back from Chad, a Fallout 76 podcast. It went like this: all of the dogs named Dogmeat in game are like CX-404, bred by the Enclave, and they serve as covert monitors. On to Section 12. Lucy and Maximus catch up to Thaddeus at radio station KPSS. Thaddeus attempts to kill them and fails miserably. As he stumbles backwards, he steps into a trap that fires a crossbow bolt through his neck. Instead of killing him, it reveals that the snake oil salesman's drug has made him something other than human as he pulls the arrow out and the wound heals immediately. With the Brotherhood approaching, Thaddeus gives Dr. Wilzig's head to Maximus and he runs for it. Maximus gives Lucy the head and tells her to run. After they kiss goodbye, Maximus takes a different head to serve as a decoy. On to the good aspects. There was a lot in this scene that I liked. First, just like with Matt Berry and Chris Parnell, I'm a fan of Fred Armisen, so seeing him here was fun. The conversation between DJ Carl and Thaddeus on the fiddle music was hilarious. Next, I liked the ridiculous traps that DJ Carl had placed around his facility. Once again, I took this as a wacky wasteland sort of thing. I don't think most people would wander into massive bear and rat traps. I also really enjoyed watching Thaddeus' terrible shooting. Every part of it's fun to watch. The missing 15 shots in a row feels so much like Fallout 1 or 2 when you try to hit something and have a low associated skill level and every shot misses. Beyond that, Thaddeus' comment about sucking without a scope, Maximus examining himself for wounds, and the look on Lucy's face were all excellent. Next, Thaddeus' reaction to being shot in the neck was quite comical, as was Lucy's reaction, from the hands over the mouth to the look of disgust as he pulled the arrow out. Beyond that, his comment of, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I should have never trusted a doctor that smelled like that," really cracked me up. Lastly, on this point, I enjoyed seeing Maximus and Lucy's relationship rise to the next level. There wasn't anything here that confused me, nor that I didn't like, nor anything lore related, so let's move on to character traits. Lucy finally has Wilzig's head again and is on the final stretch of her quest. Along with this, she's fairly well enamored with Maximus now. Not only has he saved her life multiple times and proven himself to have the right values, but here he abandoned the prize that would not only likely save his life, but have almost certainly ended with him promoted to knighthood, and he did it for her. Thaddeus now knows that something's wrong with him. While in the previous scene, the snake oil salesman's line regarding him no longer needing to worry about radiation clearly unnerved him, this is confirmed for him that something is really off. I wonder if the next time we see him, if he'll be big, bald, and yellow-green, or if he'll have shed some of his skin. On to section 13. The dwellers of 33 selected to move to 32 do so. While the vault is occupied with this ceremony, Norm heads to the Overseer's office and contacts the Overseer of 31, posing as the Overseer of 33. By this, he gains access to Vault 31. On to the good aspects. I enjoyed Overseer Betty calling the new settlers of Vault 32 pioneers. I also liked Woody freaking out about the move. In the first episode, he showed himself to be terrified about the thought of opening the vault door, and here he's completely petrified about simply going to a practically identical vault. I enjoyed seeing the strangeness of the Overseers all being 31ers continued with Stephanie Harper becoming the new Overseer of 32. Lastly, I liked seeing the hacking screen come up when Norm hacked into Betty's terminal. On to the confusing. As I stated when this plan first came up, in the aftermath of the Triennial Trade, Vault 33 was bordering on being too low on manpower to work the fields. Splitting the population at this point almost feels dangerous. Other than that, why isn't anyone from 31 coming to join the 33ers in the plan? For the record, the next episode shows exactly why, but the new pioneers of 32 have to be wondering that. With all the original 32ers dead, why wouldn't the population that's coming in be half 33ers and half 31ers? Why is 31 left out of the redistribution? There wasn't anything here that I didn't like nor anything lore related, so let's move on to character traits. Norm, having lost his investigation partner, took advantage of the situation to learn all that he could about 31. We'll see what that investigation brings in episode 8. Chet is now in 32. Not only is he losing access to his friend Norm, but he has to think that even if Lucy ever comes back, he'll only see her once every 3 years, if that. Stephanie has become the Overseer of Vault 32, the latest in a long line of 31 transplants to oversee the vault. She'll just have to hope that things go better for her than they did for her predecessor. Woody and Reg hugged each other goodbye, and the Vault 33 Council is now divided. I look forward to seeing how they handle their situation going forward. Lastly, Betty is now the only dweller from 31 and 33, with Hank McClane and Stephanie Harper gone. Along with this, she removed the only true electoral opposition in Woody, and has broken up the investigation team of Norm and Chet. Were it not for Norm's quick thinking, she would have set herself up quite well for a quiet term as Overseer. Alright, that should do it for episode 7. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons, Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Ahotep, Despy, Electric Head, Hero Cunning, Laced Cake, and E for their support. I also want to specifically thank Dark Malcontent for helping with this video's script. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.